It's good to virtually meet you.
I know, at last, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I feel like I know you through Twitter mostly.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Hey, Tim.
Hello.
Hey, Tim.
Good morning.
How
are y'all?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good.
But this is so fun, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time. We should, catch up more often. And Shane and I were just saying this is the first time we've spoken.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've known him for so long through Twitter. And now your excellent newsletter, which I'm loving and sending to everyone I know.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Don't worry.
It's fantastic.
I mean, that newsletter is a bit of a labor of love for you, Shane. How long does it take you? I'm amazed. It kind of slightly puts me to shame, and I'm a professional writer.
No, I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd. And I need a way to clarify my thoughts and think through things. And so I'm constantly reading and trying to better understand the space and the industry and business as a whole. And so, really what I started to do about a year ago was just writing it in my own little Word document of, hey, here's my thoughts of what I think this news means, or what I think a strategic imperative could come from this. And then I got to thinking, hey, I'm getting a little lazy on this. There's not a lot of pressure on me to actually think through these and think through the next implication. And so I said, hey, you know what? The best way to learn is to write and put it out there in the world. And now I get a lot of feedback and commentary on, sometimes it's, hey, this sucks, this isn't great, and you didn't think about this properly, but that's how you learn. And that's been awesome for me to learn and better understand, and quite frankly, just stay up on the space in a more meaningful way. I work in the digital space now, but have a passion for retail and crop protection and biologicals. And so it keeps me staying up on what's happening and keeps me learning. So it's been good.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's definitely a service to the industry. So we're very grateful to have it. So you started out your career as an agronomist.
Yeah.
You were doing that for a couple of years and then went into retail. Tell me a bit about the time as an agronomist.
Yeah, so most of my career was as an agronomist. So I started out as a summer student scouting fields for farmers everywhere from 1,000-acre farms to 80,000 acre farms. So it was a very interesting dynamic getting to scout and make recommendations on very different sized farms, seeing some of the different individuals. And it was always in the retail space, but moved on from agronomy and then moved into some of the marketing side of retail and crop protection and into distribution as well. And so it started to give me a real nice tie together of how the industry is ultimately connected and how distribution is impacted by some of the agronomic issues going on and how marketing ties into some of the agronomic messaging. And so it gave me a pretty cool scope on how the industry works from a Western Canadian perspective anyway. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today, and found that the digital space has a lot of implications for the entirety of the industry, whether it's retail, whether it's in the equipment side. And so got a little bit interested in that. And actually it was a big thanks to a contact of mine that sent me AgFunder. And that's how I really got into trying to learn a little bit more about the ag tech and the BC space. So it's been a pretty cool experience to be able to read and stay up on that through AgFunder.
That's awesome. And so while you were an agronomist, what were some of the biggest things that you learned, or is there anything you could share with, our audience that, aren't typically farmers and agronomists who would, something they wouldn't have known about agriculture, something that you learned that was maybe a surprise or just a big deal?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about it is just how complex it is. I don't actually come from a farm. I don't come from a farming background. My family I grew up in a small town. My dad came from a farm and worked in the industry, and so that's how I got into it. And so I think just the complexity and is probably the biggest thing I learned. But within that is just how it's all tied together and that how it's an entire system. I think a lot of the time we get to thinking about specific products and we get to thinking about, okay, this is the one decision we need to make, but really the systems thinking and the ability to tie all of the agronomics, the equipment, the economics, the grain marketing together, just how important that is, I think, is the biggest thing I learned. I know, I remember my neighbor growing up, she went into agriculture, and she's like, oh, you should go into agriculture. And I'm like, why in the heck would I want to go into farming? Like, that's crazy. And 2 years later, I changed my major and was working in this space. So yeah, it's pretty cool to get exposed to just how much technology, how much science is within the space, and just how smart the people are and need to be to farm and to really contribute to the space. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, my goodness. I mean, it is so complicated. I've been covering this now for 6-7 years, but my knowledge is very much at the early stages. I find often could be learning every day.
Yeah, it's insane. Like I even look at it like I understand a very small niche of it, and that's where I kind of focus on is the big scale farming more in the North American space. But you start to get out into some of the things that you guys report on, and the indoor farming, and you get into all the specialty crops and into California and other parts of the world. It's a dynamic space, and there's lots to know, and I think that's the exciting part about it overall, is that you can continue to learn every single day when it comes to agriculture and technology within agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tim, you started off, well, I don't know if you started off your career, but before you with AgRad and started the wonderful Future of Agriculture podcast, you were a commodities trader.
Yeah, that's right. I started my career in commodities. Actually went to school thinking I was going to manage orchards. That's what I was interested in. So I graduated with crop science and management degree. But my soon-to-be wife decided to go to veterinary school at Texas A&M, and there weren't a lot of orchard opportunities in Texas. So I took a job in the grain and feed business, buying and selling grain and feed ingredients, and ended up doing that for 8 years. And then, like you said, started AgRad in 2015, and then the Future of Agriculture podcast a year later. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So it's funny because reading this report, my background in agriculture is actually a direct to consumer livestock operation. I grew up in Northern California. We sold pigs and goats and ducks to Hispanic and Asian markets, and it was very much not cool at that time, like it is today, the direct-to-consumer stuff. It was kind of like my eyes were open to agriculture through the FFA program in high school, and I wanted to go big row crop agriculture and then eventually big orchards. And I wanted to go as, kind of big as possible. It's kind of funny to see some themes come full circle for me.
Yeah, exactly. I can imagine. And so today you're still with AgRad, but your podcast and the media side is really taking on a whole other meaning for you.
Yeah. So actually, this is very recent. Like this week, I'm making a transition. AgRad and Future of Ag both kind of monetized through recruiting. I've always called that my day job, basically headhunting, and that has been my focus up until this week. I'm actually I am selling my book of business on the recruiting side and doing communications and media work full time. So I do custom content for, podcasts, for example. I do the Soil Sense podcast and the Growing Pulse Crops podcast for Extension and the Pulse Crops Working Group. And so working with commodity groups and with ag tech companies and with agribusinesses on helping them strategically communicate with agricultural audiences. And so that's like a brand new thing. I haven't even updated any of my social profiles with that yet. So breaking news here, Louisa.
Yeah, breaking news. That's awesome. Thank you. That is so exciting.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. What a shift. Yeah, very cool. And I think there's a lot of communication work that needs to be done with the food and agriculture industry. So that's great you're doing that. Well, digging into our report, this is what I reached out to you guys a couple of weeks and promised you this farm tech report was coming out, and eventually it did after a few delays. So funding in 2019 was 4.7 billion for farm technology specifically. We do have a wider report, which I know both of you saw, which looks across all of food and agriculture, literally from farm to fork, so all the way up to the consumer end. But there are a lot of folks who are very much focused on the farm. So this is why we broke this out. And so, $4.7 billion into farm technologies, which is a 370% growth since 2013. What did you think of that overall number? Was that a surprise, or was that what you kind of, where you would have expected investment to be?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, it's, I mean, honestly, I hadn't necessarily considered it, but when I seen that number, I was insanely impressed. And I think, when I look at the trend even within that, where the VC space as a whole was down a little bit in 19, the agri-food tech space was a little bit down, and farm tech had actually bucked that trend, and I think that was probably the most encouraging and exciting part to me. Looking at the space, it's not surprising to see that there was significant growth since 2013, when we had a big climate acquisition there. But to see that trend continue on, and to see there's optimism still within the space, I think that's pretty exciting, and something that is encouraging, because there's lots of different problems and challenges that farmers are continually running into on a yearly, daily basis, and to see that there's entrepreneurs that are looking to fix that, looking for ideas to move forward on some of those challenges, or alleviate those challenges, and there's VCs that are willing to fund that. I think that's exciting and good for the industry overall.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so Tim, you speak to a lot of these entrepreneurs on your podcast, and I'm sure you talk about some of the challenges of fundraising. And I think, it's definitely not easy to raise money for a farm tech startup. And especially in the light of a lot of investors are now investing across food tech and ag tech, like the investment team at AgFunder does. And often the food tech side might seem a little bit sexier, a little bit easier to find a potential exit, or, increase in valuations, especially when you think about the world of alternative proteins and all of that jazz. Are you surprised to see this consistent growth in investment, or do you think that's kind of the trend that you were seeing?
Yeah, I am a little bit surprised to see it. I think, especially, Shane mentioned relative to the broader VC landscape, which I would think would more closely follow the overall economy, which has been very strong up until recently, of course. But whereas the farm economy kind of hasn't, the trend's sort of gone the other way. And so I'm kind of surprised to see it grow as strong as it had been and hold its own, when a lot of the customers, not all the customers, but a lot of them, are producers that are facing some, have been facing some really big headwinds economically in recent years. So it's going to be interesting, because we're so early days. I think it's going to be interesting to track that longer term of how does ag tech investing correlate or not correlate at all with the broader farm economy. The entrepreneurs I talked to that you mentioned, all of them are really trying to figure out product market fit and customer adoption. And that it makes it really hard when, boy, their customers are most worried about making it. They're most worried about surviving. They're not worried about as much as the entrepreneurs would like, what's next and how can I sort of think strategically and more longer term. So yeah, overall, I am a little bit surprised because you'd think the broader VC landscape would follow a booming economy through 2019, and maybe the farm tech specific landscape would follow the farm economy, which hasn't been booming in recent years.
Yes, that's a really good point, and I think there's always a concern about overhype and to overinvestment, and people have been talking about there being many failures to come, and we see a few failures on the way, but I don't think we've really seen a significant amount of failures just yet. And obviously now with the coronavirus, I think that's going to be something that's going to be happening over all industries. Are there any categories that you're particularly concerned about that you think look a bit inflated?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one I tend to focus more in the farm management software and the IoT and the biological space, and none of that really surprised me. I think when I look at the report overall, one of the things that surprises me, probably for a lack of understanding and ignorance to it, is just the novel farm systems and how that continues to grow. I know that there's some interesting technology in there in terms of being able to grow some veggies right in the grocery store and that sort of thing. But when you start to look at the economics of indoor farming, that's where I look at that, and I think without having ever dived in deep to it, it kind of astounds me just how much investment is going into there, and really interested and curious to see how over the next coming years that space grows or doesn't continue to grow, and how demand for indoor farming shapes up, just because of the economics to actually output a certain amount of pounds of vegetables, or maybe it's grams of cannabis or whatever different plant or crop is being grown indoors. So that's something that I think, for lack of understanding in my world, it's something that continues to surprise me, seeing those big numbers there.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think that specific category, the indoor agriculture, the vertical farms, particularly these massive plant factories, they're so capital intensive and they've raised these huge rounds, but a lot of them have really taken a lot of time to scale, waiting to hear from some of the big names. When is their next big farm being built? Where is that? There's a lot of talk of them going overseas and building things across Asia and things like that. We still haven't seen that. Whereas some of those more distributed models, like you mentioned, that are in the supermarkets, they potentially are having more success. It's just each farm is a much smaller scale. But I think you're right. I think this is an interesting thing around VC in this space, is a lot of investors get attracted to the cool, shiny, looks like it could be grown in space, something that captures their imagination. And I wonder how much that will continue, or if investors, as this becomes more of a understanded asset class, or it becomes more of a normal sector for VC, some of that investing, that sort of passion investing, might wane away. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think, well, first let me say that I think indoor ag and these novel farming systems are great for agriculture. What surprises me, to echo Shane's comments, is how attractive they are to VCs, especially when right now we're really talking leafy greens, very low margin. You kind of, to make that work, especially with the capital intensity that's involved, you really need to see a broad consumer growth and demand for leafy greens. And I think that'd be a tough case to make. So they have to go more nutrient dense crops, strawberries, tomatoes, that sort of thing. But, still the margin for what they have to do to actually make a dent in the scale that is the agricultural food system, they need to grow radically. And that growth, with how capital intensive they are, is going to take a lot more money. And I just don't know that the margins are there for the returns. So I don't want this to sound like I'm, poo-pooing indoor ag or novel farming systems at all, because I think they're great for agriculture. I'm just surprised they're great for VCs.
Right. Exactly. And also particularly because a lot of them are very infrastructural in nature. These are sort of physical assets, which doesn't often fit with the VC model of preferring sort of software type assets.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, Louisa. The other thing I was just going to say on that is, I'm surprised how many of them want to be the farmers. Like, they've got these massive engineering teams. Why not soar with your strengths, which is engineer this system that's proprietary and sell that? Why raise the money to go build more and more and more of these facilities? That, to me, seems like it has to be the model going forward. But then you run into another problem. Who's going to buy the expensive technology and do it themselves? You don't have a market there either. So I'm sure that's why most of them are pursuing that avenue. Anyway, it just gets down to I have trouble finding the pot of gold at the end of that rainbow.
Right. Yeah. And also it comes down to those relationships. If you're actually the farmer as well, having to get, your offtake and getting that out into the supermarkets and things, that's no easy feat. And I think some of them have struggled with some of those relationships too. Just a quick plug on those systems. Actually, one of the investments that AgFunder has made is a company called Intelligent Growth Solutions. They were in the report, and they do actually build those systems and then sell them on to the actual growers. And some of those are turning out to be, I think, some of the big plant factory VC-backed names that we all know. But it is interesting, yeah, where is that market going to come from? Obviously, these are quite prescient times now. I think there's a lot of talk around local food systems. Countries such as Singapore, which have food security challenges, are definitely looking to do more in the indoor agriculture space. So I think maybe the question around scaling this will be governments getting involved at potentially trying to scale some of this technology and taking on some of that risk. But just to put that in context, novel farming systems raised 945 million last year, which is the second to ag biotechnology, which is at 1.1 billion. So those are very similar numbers, and yet ag biotechnology, which encompasses all seed technologies, biologicals, all inputs, that does make it seem quite crazy. You're right, Tim, when you put it into that context. But so looking at ag biotechnology, Shane, with your experience there, are you how do you feel about a lot of the investments in that category were in the gene editing space and then also in biological alternatives? How do you see those developing? You know, there has been quite a bit of skepticism, particularly on the biological side, a lot of excitement on gene editing side, but it's quite early days.
Yeah, I think, the CRISPR side of things, I think being able to very precisely edit those plant genes, being able to actually identify exactly what you want to achieve when you're going into those plants, or when even in the animal side, I think that's pretty exciting. But on the biological side of things, which is a space that I'm pretty bullish on, I know there's a lot of foo-foo dust this and snake oil that, which I think there's ultimately challenges, but I think we look at it very linearly in that space, where it's like, okay, we need to be all biologicals, and if it's not all biologicals, then it's going to be a bust. But the reality is, there's a lot of very positive organisms out there when it comes to rhizobacteria and all these different microbes that can really benefit special crops and field crops. And one of the challenges is really in just understanding where to use them and how to use them, and then just the distribution of those. And I think we know that there is those microbes in that space that can have a real big impact on crops, to the tune of anywhere from 5 to 20% increases in yield. But it's about getting that consistently in the field, and it's about doing that clear across different geographies. But I think where we'll see some interesting breakthroughs in that space is really in how do you utilize that in conjunction with synthetic products? How do you actually distribute that to the soil in a way that makes sure that those microbes are living and doing it in an efficient manner? And so I think that's pretty exciting there. But even, I look at an example of like a trace genomics, where they're trying to understand the soil and the microbiome. And as we start to get a better understanding of that and where to deploy these biologicals, I think we can really see a good uptick in how efficiently they're used, how effectively they're used, and ultimately the demand from the farmer for those. Do I expect that to happen in the next year or two? Not necessarily, but I think over the course of the next 5, 7, 10 years, we're going to see some pretty cool technology applied to those biologicals that enable us to utilize those in a really efficient and effective manner. So that's the exciting part for me on the biological and biotech side of things.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it seems that it's just so dependent on where you are, obviously which crop you're growing, but the climate and everything like that, that those startups can't have a one size fits all. So in terms of their strategy for getting these products onto the farm, are you noticing startups trying to diversify that, or do you think they're just going after one specific solution in one specific climate to start with, and then hopefully being able to expand from there?
Yeah, I think I think there has been many that try and boil the ocean, so to speak, and kind of broad brush it. But in my opinion, that is the best way to go, is to understand the crop and the geography, that you can really go in, get a win, get some positive data, positive ROIs, and then build from there. I think the challenge is in scaling some of that to the tune of what VCs are looking for. Obviously, that's kind of a challenge. I tend to come at it from how is this sort of technology going to ultimately work for the farmer? But in the VC space, I can't say for sure that there's going to be huge returns on that side of things, but it is interesting in the sense that I think when we look at the Syngentas and the BASFs and all these big agribusinesses, it's something that you see all of them have it in their portfolios. They're partnering with all these different organizations, and I think they're going to identify those niche fits and then expand from there.
Yeah, what you've spoken to a lot of these guys, Tim. What are your opinions on how this space is building out and actually being developed on the farm?
Yeah, I'm still, even though it's kind of leading the way on your report, I'm still bullish this space very much so. I think one thing it does that maybe some other areas of ag tech don't do so well is they hit on very real pain points. A lot of these biotech companies. So you talk about something like resistance. If you've been treating a weed for decades, in the same way, and you're now noticing resistance, it doesn't work anymore. That's a real pain point. Or if you're being hit with regulations that tie your hands from what you can and can't use, that's a very real pain point. It drives you to look for new solutions. I think other areas of ag tech maybe struggle with that, where it's kind of nice to haves and not necessarily like farmer needs. And so I see a lot of that in this category of ag biotechnology. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of room to go to solve those pain points, and they're constantly changing, right? We're seeing new resistance or spread of resistance happen all the time. Of course, Shane could probably speak to that better than I could from his agronomic background.
Yeah, I think from a resistance perspective, there's lots of opportunity, and again, to use those in conjunction with synthetics. Maybe you go in there. There's the Rantizos and all these other technologies and companies that can actually deploy some of these microbes and biotech technology from a weed perspective very effectively and efficiently. That is kind of interesting when you start to see this. Coalesce together. I think even on you mentioned the pain points, Tim, and you look at one of the most or the highest expenses for farmers generally tends to be on the fertilizer side. What a lot of these microbes tend to do really, really well is solubilize different fertilizers in the soil, enable the root health, but then also you start to look at some of this nitrogen fixation with the Pivot Bios and some of these other organizations. That's exciting, and again, goes to your point of hits on that pain point in a real meaningful way, and is something that can have an impact on costs and ROI right off the bat in the first year of use.
Yeah, and it's in thinking about Pivot Bio, who are probably one of the most successful in the microbial space, or seem to have some solid results behind them. They've been partnering quite a bit with other groups. One of them, I think it's G-Bar-C, I might have got the name slightly wrong, but in terms of how they actually look after the microbes before they're applied, they have an actual sort of application technology. I think there's a lot that's often is unknown about, what goes into the actual application of these products and looking after them and making sure that they work effectively. And I've noticed a lot of different partnerships are cropping up in the startup space that can provide different parts of the chain before something's actually being applied onto the farm. Have you noticed those same partnerships being necessary? And this isn't necessarily just in ag biotech. It seems to be happening in other parts of digital ag tech too, where startups are realizing that their solution is not enough of a draw for a farmer. The farmer needs something much more complete and ready for them to become interested.
Yeah, I would say, go ahead. Seth.
Oh, go
Shane,
ahead, Tim. No, you're giver. Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of startups are realizing if you show up with pretending your solution solves every problem for a farmer, you're going to get laughed off the farm. And then also if there's three of you that show up, one right after another, all with a different solution, the farmer's just going to experience, this fatigue this ag tech fatigue that is very much talked about out there. So I think the partnerships make a lot of sense. And, one of the problems is no person, farmer included, is going to want 100 different apps that all do different things on their phone, or 100 different people kind of knocking their door down with their solution. They want to see these ag tech companies working together and communicating and offering more of a comprehensive solution that has the farmer in mind. So that, I think that makes sense in itself. I was curious for you, Louisa, too, with Pivot Bio. I thought I saw, did they just raise like a huge round, and was that in this report? Yes. Or did that happen after the report?
No, yeah, that just happened a couple of weeks ago, $100 million.
Okay. So that wasn't in here then?
No, that wasn't in this one.
Okay. I didn't think so, but that would be obviously a big one. I'm glad you brought them up, because I had them in mind, because I didn't see kind of that reflected because I knew it was really recent. But anyway, I think that's they're definitely one to watch. A very, very interesting company, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've got some fantastic investors. They've got Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is backed by Bill Gates and Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos and all of those high flyers. It's nice to see names like that coming into our space. We didn't really have that, 6 years ago. Right. So it's always exciting. We have some celebrity investors in a way. One category that has been growing, and I know can be quite contentious in the agriculture space, is the online agribusiness marketplaces. That category raised $672 million last year. I'm not sure if that was growth year on year, but it's still definitely creeping up in terms of volume. Lots of different ways that technology is being applied, whether it's enabling farmers to find new routes to purchase their seeds and inputs, or whether it's helping them to find new markets to sell their offtake. Shane, you've got some thoughts about this. You obviously had a retailer background. Where do you think these marketplaces fit, and what's the right business model?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I think it's going to depend on a lot of different things. You look at some of the big marketplaces out there today. FBN's an easy one to talk about. They one of the highest valuations in ag tech today, and the thing that I think surprises me about them is there's still a very linear business model in terms of that marketplace dynamic, and that's something that if they are actually going to achieve some of those returns, have a big impact on the entirety of the distribution and the supply chain in agriculture. I'm curious how they're actually going to pivot there. I think when I look at the space in general, it's when I look at a true marketplace, you tend to have a lot of fragmentation is where we see a lot of benefit out of the marketplaces, and the Airbnbs and Ubers are examples in the consumer space. But in ag, we tend to have very consolidated product offerings. We have very few options in a lot of ways. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how these true marketplaces go. I know today you have some of the ag bens and those types of organizations that are starting very niche. And I think from there, whether it's them or like the bushels on the grain side of things, I think them getting in that niche, being able to build up that use case, build out that habit, I think from there, they really enable themselves to be able to move into a more dynamic marketplace space where they can start to bring on more than just grain or more than just crop inputs. And all of a sudden you have a marketplace where maybe there's financing on there, maybe there's insurance on there. Again, this is probably thinking, probably jumping a few steps ahead here on that. But today I think it'll be interesting to watch how those organizations actually grow and strategize moving forward. And when I look at the retailers and the channel in general is very powerful in agriculture. And that's something that they're not going to give up easily. They want to still be that go-to place for farmers and for farm groups, and so it's something that I have a lot of thoughts on, but I don't necessarily have a specific end point of where that's going to end up today.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what is the pain point in retail? So FBN has very much sort of put it behind there being a lack of transparency and wanting to make it fairer for the farmer. Is that actually a pain point? There's other marketplaces that want to work with the retailer and help them to digitize their relationships a bit more, but just trying to, understand what the process is like. Is it broken? Does it need disrupting as such?
I mean, I guess it depends who you ask on it. I probably have a bias in it. I think for a lot of farmers, there is challenges because there is asymmetric information flow within that side of the business. I think when it comes to that space, I don't know that FBN is necessarily going to be the answer in that. I think some of these ag bens that are supporting some of the retails, the bushels that are supporting some of the grain origination side of things, I think that is a pretty good start in terms of giving farmers access to more information, access to that pricing, and ultimately being able to enhance their experience in purchasing crop inputs or selling grains. FBN, do they give some price transparency? For sure, but I think there's still challenges in terms of the physical distribution of crop protection products, or fertilizer or what have you, which doesn't get talked about. Some of the challenges inherent within that, and how distribution is still king. And you look at some of the bigger organizations in ag, like the nutrients, they are evolving to offer some online pricing, online purchasing, and without the hassle of trying to get product into your shed at the right time, which can be a challenge when we have very condensed seasons, very time specific needs when it comes to products. So it is a space that I think we'll see some evolution in, but I don't necessarily think it's broken today either.
And what do you think, Tim, in the context of COVID-19, a lot of, anything that's online and digital is seemingly more important than ever. Do you think that stretches to the retail side too?
That's a good question. I think it does, at least temporarily. Me being from a grain and feed background, and I bought a lot of corn from farmers, or bought a lot of, wheat, soybeans, milo, et cetera. What I always am very skeptical of is when people come in and say, "Oh wow, the process is so antiquated. The farmer needs to pick up the phone and call someone to sell," and they don't finish the sentence, because the rest of the sentence is sell about $500,000 of their assets. Like, they don't mind picking up the phone when it's a transaction that can make or break their business. And so again, it's ag tech sort of having a tendency to caricaturize a farmer and say, boy, this is a real big problem. Can you believe how old this system is? When it's a big deal, they want that relationship. And when I say that, I don't mean all of them, because all farmers are different, but it isn't as big of a pain point as maybe some people would have it look. And so on the grain and feed side, I'm always a little bit skeptical of that point. To your question more directly on retail, it's been a really interesting storyline to follow, because you have FBN, which is very smartly says, hey, we're about the farmer. We're for farmers, by farmers. We're all about the farmer. We're going to level the playing field. And they agitated what is already a perception on the part of many farmers, which is, hey, this isn't fair, right? And so that kind of agitates that pain point, which causes a whole new pain point, which is retailers, saying like, well, what about us? We can be just as good, in terms of our service. And they look at maybe a partner like AgVed. So I think it's been a very interesting narrative to develop. And, I think those types of companies are here to stay. I think it has to go way beyond whether I'm going to transact online or whether I'm going to call someone or have someone show up on my farm. And then also the real key point that needs to be included here is some of the best service providers that show up on a farm and help a farmer are those people who are selling, the retailers, are those people who are selling them their products. And those people have to have a role because they're instrumental to these farm operations. So I even though I'm not from an ag retail background, I find the ag retail environment very interesting right now. And I love reading Shane's comments on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and like to your point on that, Tim, these are high value purchases, and I think we and I do it all the time too, where it's like, okay, well, this is what happens in the consumer space, this is what we can apply to ag, but ultimately when you are making those sorts of purchases, you do need these sorts of this expertise, this information flow. I think the focus needs to be on an enhanced channel to reach that farmer and communicate with the farmer, and that's where some of those egg vends and commodity eggs and those sorts of organizations come in versus FBN, who and again, nothing against them. I think that they have their vision of what the future looks like, and I do think there is some challenges with that, but I think these egg vends and these organizations supporting the retail who know the farmer, know the customer, know the geography, know what's necessary to be able to enhance yields, enhance ROI. I think there's a lot of value in those organizations and some of these other technologies that are like a Shopify, so to speak, in ag is where we can really see some uptake.
So what a lot of the comments that you've made for this category, and also thinking about ag biotech and novel farming systems, is this is all going to take a lot of time. There's a lot of kinks to work out. There's a lot of relationships. Agriculture is the oldest industry in the world. It's not going to change overnight. But you have venture capital, and venture capital firms have generally 10-year funds, might be able to extend it a couple of years. They need to make a return in that. And this is the sort of unspoken debate. Well, it is spoken a bit, but not so spoken about how to generate that return in that time frame. I mean, what do you guys think about the match between venture capital and ag tech?
Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, I think there's places where it makes a lot of sense. If a marketplace is going to survive, they're going to need a lot of money because you have to grow quickly. I mean, you have to scale quickly. You need both sides of the marketplace on board, and that's really hard to do bootstrapping. It's just very difficult to do, to kind of create that ecosystem without venture capital. Similarly, with companies that require a lot of R&D, like biotech or robotics, or these novel farm systems, I think they need the venture capital to exist in a lot of cases. Now, to your point about can they return in 10 years, I become a lot more skeptical. I think the time horizon has to be longer, especially when you consider, 10 years in a lot of cases for a lot of companies is 10 iterations. So you take a different company, whatever health tech or fintech, and 10 iterations is, in 2 months. And so I do think they require maybe a little bit more patient capital, but this ecosystem is growing, and it's not going to grow in lockstep. So we needed the early stage venture capital, which is where a lot of the focus has been so far. We're starting to see maybe, hopefully, a little bit more in the later stage venture capital, and then we need kind of the private equity and the corporates to start stepping up. And I think everybody's hoping that they're going to, but this ecosystem is being built right before our very eyes, which is both exciting and terrifying because not all the pieces are in place yet. You know, the 10-year time horizon for exits doesn't seem to be there right now.
Right. And we are seeing a growth in that late stage funding. So in what we categorize as late,
Right.
which is after Series D, raised 1.1 billion in 2019. And that was the biggest kind of stage growth. And you're seeing, you know, different types of players coming in there. So they're not necessarily ag tech focused. They could be generic private equity. They could be growth stage capital. They could be foundations, or they could be, you know, completely different types of money coming in there. I think there's a bit of uncertainty around how that will look and who will be taking some of those on. But I think potentially there's a chance for a private equity firm to be an acquirer maybe of a company, and that would be the exit for the VC. Really interesting there. I mean, we're slightly running out of time, but I definitely want to talk to you about farm management software category. Obviously, Shane, that's what you live and breathe at Farmer's Edge. Yeah. This category is kind of, I guess we could say it's where ag tech started, really. You know, Climate Corporation would fit there, and they were the first kind of only unicorn we've had in the digital space so far. It's still the most active sector category in terms of number of deals, and you see digital solutions popping up all over the world. It seems to be where ag tech ecosystems start in a way in that place. You know, do we need more apps? What's your general view of the state of play in farm management software and what's missing?
Yeah, I don't know if we necessarily need more apps, but you know, you mentioned the climate is one of the biggest exits, but two other big exits fall into that as well, in the Blue River Technologies and the granulars. And so when we look at fit for BC in terms of being able to scale, I think there's a good fit within that space. I think there's obviously challenges in terms of the connectivity. I think is something that as we see, you know, people talk about 5G, and that might be a little bit of ways, but just getting basic connectivity, I think we can see some more significant uptake. And when we get that connectivity, you know, I look at this space in terms of all the sensors and the IoT and all of that. Ultimately, you need the data. You need to be able to put that up into the cloud. It needs to be able to get there so we can actually take away from these gut feel decisions. We can actually make these decisions based on data. And I think this space is something that we will continue to see grow, and we will continue to see interest in, because it does have that fit, but it also has the opportunity within that space to really, I think Tim hit on this earlier, where, you know, you look at things like tech that immediately saves money is a good fit, solves multiple problems even, and can be built out and integrated on. And I think that's where this space really ties a lot of different components of ag tech together. So you can have your sensor technology that feeds into the platform, that feeds into the cloud, that uses machine learning, that can actually spit out some information that makes a better decision over time. And so even in terms of, I mentioned the Blue River Tech, it takes a little bit of effort to get the R&D focus there. But if I look at from a Western Canadian or a North American perspective anyways, one of the biggest technologies that has really taken off is auto steer. I mean, it seems it's been around for a long time, but that's something where a farmer can get a return right off the hop by using that. They immediately save money, save time and those sorts of things. And when I look at some of the technologies out there, like the Blue River Techs, once that R&D gets fulfilled, you can go out there and automatically cut down on your pesticide costs. And then you can also build right onto that, where you can manage resistance within that as well, because you can utilize two different types of active ingredients. Or we start to look at a first pass technologies from like a Verge Agro, where they are streamlining the efficiency of a route like a Google Maps would. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space to continue on. And as we get more uptake and make things more passive for the farmer, right now there's so much manual entry that quite frankly does take a lot of time and isn't something that people want. But as the cost of sensors goes down because the technology is improving, as connectivity improves, I think this space does have a huge upside. I'm obviously biased, but that's the reason I like it so much, is because I do see the opportunity to really change the way farmers farm, and ultimately that's going to be beneficial for them and consumers in the long run.
Yeah, so Tim, you've no doubt interviewed a bunch of different farm management software platforms. What has impressed you the most, and do you think they need to be all things to the farmer, or can you have some that are a bit more specific in terms of what they offer?
Oh boy, I think both. I mean, I think in some cases, there are niches available for sure in farm management software that's built directly for them. And there are some smaller companies, even more kind of completely open source companies popping up that help. For example, a small produce grower has to not only do all of the farm management stuff you'd think of, but also has to manage food safety. And so that element may not exist in other farm management software. So yeah, there definitely are niches in that space. One thing I'm interested in too, to take it from more of a consumer angle, is, I think as we go forward here, the consumer is going to continue to want to know about their food. That's, cliche to say, but it's going to be more than that. It's going to be, okay, don't give us some BS label about this or that, natural or whatever the case may be, show us. And the data is going to have to be there. And in order for that to happen, the market's going to have to create incentives for farmers to track and share that data. And I think that's interesting in this area of sort of tracking sustainability metrics, proving out for everything from carbon credits to claims that a food company can make to their consumer.
Guys, still so much to dig into, but I really appreciate it. So great to just as a final thought. Obviously, you're living in a pandemic right now. It's hard to forget about that. What do you think that means for ag tech and BCC?
Sorry, you were breaking up a bit there for me, Louisa.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
You were for me too. I couldn't hear you either. But was it in COVID-19? What does that mean for ag tech and VC? Was that it?
Yes, exactly. What are your what are your concerns? What do you think it means for ag tech and VC?
For me, I'll just start in on one point on that. I think it brings to light that we can be the most efficient producers in the world and have strong consumer demand and still have major problems. So I think even though I know we're talking farm tech here, I think it really brings to light the rest of the value chain, that middle piece, to get figured out. I think people are realizing how important that is, and how, even though it's extremely efficient and we've optimized for efficiency and consistency, it's still somewhat delicate and maybe has room for innovation. So I know that's off topic here a little bit, but that's kind of the biggest thing that stands out to me.
Yeah, that's a good comment on that, Tim. And for me, I think the biggest thing is obviously this is hopefully something that's not typical in the long run, but I think being able to utilize remote sensing tools so that you can remotely monitor what's happening on the farm, being able to communicate remotely with farmers, I think we are going to see some increased uptake from that. And I think in terms of the actual investment, maybe it is down just in terms of capital being a bit tight throughout the year. But I think obviously the smart venture firms, the corporate VCs, they're going to still be looking for opportunities. They still have capital to deploy. And I think they're going to be looking for some of those pieces to the puzzle that will enhance their ability to connect with that farmer, to converse with that farmer, and to be able to understand what's going on a farm without physically going to that farm or physically being at that kitchen table, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both so much. This was such a treat. Really great to speak to you both, and stay safe, and hope we can speak again soon.
Yeah, it was so fun. Thank you so much, Louisa, for putting this together. And thanks, Shane. I always learn so much from you. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And yeah, great to finally meet you, Louisa. And
yeah,
thanks,
exactly.
I love listening to you talk and your perspective on everything. It's great.